Black Lives Matter. Not Black Lives Matter more or White Lives Don't Matter. Black Lives Matter. That's it. That's the tweet. Hey guys, welcome back to the Weekly Web Activist. It's your host Lydia, and this week we are going to be talking about Black Lives Matter. And so this video is going to be broken down into a couple of parts. We're going to start with the Civil Rights Movement, Black Liberation, and then we're going to move on to talking about Black Lives Matter specifically, their history, and everything surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement currently. We're of course then going to talk about how you can help the Black Lives Matter movement either locally, statewide, nationally, and then we're going to close out with some talking points that you may be able to use with family and friends when discussing the Black Lives Matter movement and discussing what you can do to help the advancement of Black people and BIPOC. So that's what the video is about. Very informational, so stick around to the very end to get everything in, and hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Comment if you have any other aspects of Black Lives Matter that I forgot to touch on during this video. And of course, let me know if you like the video. Any suggestions for the next one?
I'm always learning and growing.
Okay, so let's go. Because if you're not fighting racism with an Afro samurai headband, it's not as fun. So when most people think about the fight for Black liberation, they think about the Civil Rights Movement. Great leaders and activists such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Angela Davis, and so many other people emerged during this time and led the nation in the changes that it needed to make in terms of racial equality, educational equality, and so many other subjects. And so, bit of a crash course in the Civil Rights Movement. If you don't know, the Civil Rights Movement happened during the 1960s and it went into the early 70s. Great things were accomplished within this movement, such as the Civil Rights Act that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson, and other things as equal voting rights and just the sense of Black people and people of color being more respected than they were at the time in America. And so I have a timeline here in the corner, and so I have a dream speech from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 that happened. Malcolm X, who was a great leader that emerged during the Civil Rights Movement. He had a bit of a controversial history, but in the end was fighting for Black nationalism, and the advancement of Black people by any means necessary. He was assassinated in 1965. You had the Black Panther Party form in 1966 with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And the Black Panther Party was all about Black liberation, and armed protest. And then, of course, Angela Davis and all of the work that she contributed to the movement, a great poet, a great public speaker, and she spoke in front of bulletproof glass in the Madison Square Garden in 1972. And so all of these things and a bunch of other things happened during the Civil Rights Movement. These activists fought for things such as education equity, voting rights, the end of segregation, and so many more topics. And while so many changes were made during the Civil Rights Movement, and all Black Americans and people of color today living in America owe it to the Civil Rights Movement for really advancing America's thoughts and policies and making it a more equitable place for everyone, their fight didn't end there, and the fight continues today in different ways. A good example of this is after the 1970s, mass incarceration started within the United States. 1 out of 4 of the world's prisoners, or 25% of the world's prisoners, now belong to the United States of America. They're our citizens. The war on drugs negatively affected so many Black and brown communities. They were disproportionately discriminated against in healthcare and medicine, and so many other issues arise that still make America an inequitable place. While we want to celebrate the accomplishments of the Civil Rights Movement, you have to understand that the work isn't over, and there's so many people right now working for the advancement of Black and brown people in America today. So one of the issues that came up recently in the last decade or so And this really happened before, but now with the sense of technology, we're able to capture things that we would not usually see on camera. Was the unarmed killings of black and brown men and women by the police caught on camera. This first caught America's attention with the murder of Trayvon Martin, and this is where Black Lives Matter comes into play. So Black Lives Matter was co-founded by 3 people, and they're Opal Tomeli, Alicia Garza, and Patrisse Cullors, and this is an international anti-racism advocacy movement and platform. And so they were founded July 13th, 2013. They're decentralized, meaning that there's not one person in charge, but it's really everyone just fighting for racial equity, especially for black people, under the banner of Black Lives Matter. And so it's a social movement that is based largely within the US. A lot of people ask, like, okay, so what does Black Lives Matter really fight for? And the answer is simple. It fights for the equity of black people. It fights for people to stop being racist, and it fights for people to stop using police brutality as a form of promoting their racism and therefore ending the lives of black people. You know, it fights for an equitable space where all black people are respected and uplifted, you know, and that's just really it. It's that simple. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is really known around the world, not only for their policy work, but also mainly for their protest. There have been protests in places such as New Zealand, Belgium, the United States, of course, you know, Europe and Asia, South Korea, Africa, and so many other places. And so really the global efforts and the global protests are what most people pay attention to. Good things that have come out of Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter protests recently is the Breonna Taylor Law. It's a law that affects no-knock warrants in Louisville, Kentucky, and so she was fatally shot and killed by police officers that were supposedly using a no-knock warrant, and they had totally wrong house and information. And so it bans no-knock warrants, which are dangerous to the community, to that local community, and honestly any community where those warrants are allowed. The social change and the change of social culture around systemic racism, around police brutality, and around all of the other issues. People that wouldn't originally care about something like this have started taking a stand and showing their solidarity and support. And so I feel like everybody really appreciates that, and everybody is learning new life lessons together, working together and advocating together for the end of systemic racism, the end of mass incarceration, and the beginning of stronger equity, stronger appreciation, and stronger respect of black people, not only by law enforcement, not only by, you know, the Senate, the state, and all of those legal places, but then also just the social norm, you know, and being conscious of your own actions. That's really what's being pushed these days, and so that's something good that has come out of Black Lives Matter. Also, since the death of George Floyd was brutally murdered. He was suffocated by Officer Derek Chauvin for approximately 8 minutes and 42 seconds, and he was killed in St. Louis, Missouri. Something good that has, you know, really stemmed from such a tragic death, from such a tragic murder, is that people have started taking another look of how they view, you know, black citizens in America. Some people in the discussion of the death of George Floyd, it'd be like, oh, he has a criminal record. But then you have to ask yourself, does that mean that he deserved to die, to suffocate at the hands of police for a supposedly counterfeit $20 bill, when the actual officer has over $40,000 in unpaid taxes? Like, that just doesn't make any sense, you know. And so it really helped people realize the weight of the things that they say. You know, people have become more conscientious in realizing that Black Lives Matter is just that. Black lives as they are matter. You don't have to be like Elijah McClain. You don't have to play a violin and volunteer at shelters. You can have flaws and mistakes and be a basic person, but you deserve the same human dignity as anyone else. And so that's a lesson that people have started to take out of Black Lives Matter. So, some ways that you can support Black Lives Matter is supporting the protest. You can support the protest by donating to bail funds, making art and posters for the protest, physically going to protest, of course, wearing masks, gloves, socially distancing, and all of that. And then, of course, anything else you can think of that's related to the protest or their organizers specifically. You can support the organizations and the movements yourselves. You'd be surprised how many local organizations you can find that have similar values to Black Lives Matter or are part of the Black Lives Matter movement. You can help out your community by following and donating to these organizations, as well as attending any virtual or physical events that they may have and sharing it with your friends and family. The third way to support Black Lives Matter is supporting the values of Black Lives Matter. You should always support the values of a cause that you're working for or a cause that you believe in. And this means ingraining the values into your everyday life. If you hear somebody say something racist, and no, this isn't just you're in a conversation with your friend and they say the N-word. That's a part of it, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Statements like, oh, there's a reason why black crime is so high, when in reality it's not, but that's a whole nother issue. Or, oh, like black people are so dumb. Or even something as simple as using AAVE, African American Vernacular English, to mock a black person. Any of that is not okay, and you should definitely call it out if you're having conversations with people. Self-reflection and a willingness to change is key in these situations. And so between supporting the protests, the organizations, and the values, you should find plenty of ways to help support Black Lives Matter. So, of course, like I said earlier in the video, I was going to go over some talking points that may come up when you're having conversations about Black Lives Matter with your friends and family. The first one is Black Lives Matter is liberal propaganda. No, Black Lives Matter is a human rights movement. It's a civil rights movement. It's a movement for the advancement of black people in America. Bringing up not only the police killings, but the health disparities, especially with COVID-19, and the environmental aspects as well, redlining, and just honestly bring up anything you want, and it would most likely work to rebut this point and help get people to understand your values and your beliefs. Number 2, racism isn't systemic. So many civil rights laws and practices can be brought up here in this point. The recently passed Breonna Taylor Law, as I mentioned earlier, for no knock warrants would be a good point. Also, just bring up how law is applied. Mass incarceration is like a huge example here of how the law is disproportionately applied to black people. And you could really just talk about anything else. With the cops, there's no such thing as a bad apple. It's the system of the cop's job and how the cop's job is being applied to black communities is the problem. That's the problem. And so there's so many things that you can bring up in with the conversation about Black Lives Matter. I would just say, for advice, make sure to be factual, make sure to be sincere, and make sure to realize that at the end of the day, not everybody will agree with you, but you know your values, you know your beliefs, and you know what you're fighting for, and that's most important. And so that brings us to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you're here, you guys are MVPs. Thank you. And so I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that it was informational. I hope that you learned some things from it, or you're reminded of some things, and you have just this renewed sense of spirit, in working for the Black Lives Matter movement, and fighting for all of the important causes that you care about. And so I hope you guys enjoyed the activist feature that was posted yesterday. I had a great time talking to Gigi Health yesterday, and so I really hope that you guys go watch that video also. Of course, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on Black Lives Matter in the comments below. and have a great day. Continue to be Weekly Web activists. Thank you.